That morning was like a thin pane of glass laid over Fairmont Crest, every movement bent a little out of shape, every sound seemed to echo from somewhere deeper, sending each person into the new day with the feeling of being watched by older versions of themselves. Vernon left home early, trailing a sweetness of cologne and a work schedule hacked into unexplainable gaps. He knew he was standing on the surface of a frozen lake, with black water moving beneath, and every step might be the final crack. The concealments had piled up like little air pockets between ice and water, ready to burst from the lightest touch, and today's clandestine appointment was the uncompromising needle. Vernon believed he was keeping the family's helm in his hands, that someone had to accept being the villain in other people's eyes so things wouldn't slip off course, but he also knew there was no way to justify the envelopes, the midnight calls, the draft agreements tossed in a coded inbox. All of them were evidence of a parallel life he had fed on the naive pride that he could control the aftermath. Anita felt her unease differently, as a dull, continuous vertigo, the kind that struck whenever the drumline in the studio thudded harder than her heart, making her picture the shadowed corners where stray fragments of Vernon's memory lay waiting to be fitted into a confession. She understood the pressure of standing under stage lights while a private life was rewritten online like a communal script anyone could edit, but she refused to be reduced to a mere illustration for the redemption arc of a man who forgot that love cannot be insured against moral risk. Her overwhelm did not only spring from fear of losing Vernon, it also came from the humiliation of failure if, after all, her finely tuned intuitions about him had been illusions crafted by a proud loneliness. She stood in the studio among half-finished mixes like questions without a landing point, and in her head, she reorganized strategy. If truth was about to whip the wheel, she would be the one to turn it, not be dragged by the crowd's commentary. Her anger didn't erupt noisily, it quietly raised the standard, coldly severed lines of dependence, and pushed her to the rim where only two choices were left: stand alone, or drop and force someone else to jump after her. Meanwhile, Derek counted his heartbeat by the number of times he dodged responsibility, and each time discovered a new rationalization that made him sound more wounded than at fault. He went to Shanice believing she would save him again, reassembling the shards into a shape clean enough to display to those who needed soothing. But Shanice had reached the edge of her patience, realizing that every rescue was enabling Derek's immortal fantasy that he could start over without paying. She gave him an inescapable confrontation. Stop, accept pain, drop the pretty explanations, apologize with actions that cost something, accept fewer admirers in order to keep a few who truly love. Derek heard the snap of his own image in that mirror, as if seeing a stranger wearing his name, and anger first detonated at the very concept of limits. He wanted to believe Shanice was wrong, wanted to believe a spectacular burst could still flip every verdict, but in the deeper strata of fear he knew the only exit was through the swamp, not above it. His inner conflict became a current leaking through every corner of life. The slightest touch shocked anyone who forgot to wear gloves. Leslie received news from Eva, a fragment about Ted so cold it froze her emotional interface for several minutes. She didn't need more details to foresee the bridge of trust she had painstakingly built with Ted could collapse overnight if the foundation had been drilled by suspicion. Leslie did not cry, nor did she instantly excuse Ted. She inventoried the signs she had missed, the misaligned timings, the stories bloated with detail to the point of absurdity, as if the teller were erecting scaffolding for a building without design. Her anger was the anger of someone who knows the rules but is forced to play as a piece. It was quiet and aimed straight at the opponent's weakness, the need to be believed. She understood that the news, true or not, already had enough weight to shape everyone's next step. She deliberately chose the path least friendly to feeling and safest for truth, stripping love of its privilege and heading directly to the source to ask questions in a way no one expected. With each step she forced herself outside the herd of supporters and detractors, like a surgeon with a scalpel who cannot be allowed to tremble even when the patient on the table once held her hand through the longest winter. Naomi was no stranger to collapse. She had lived with it long enough to know not every landslide roars and not every cliff warns with noise. Her disappointment slid along her habits and drained meaning from gestures that had once mattered: brewing coffee, choosing music, answering messages, tending to herself in the mirror. The people who loved her rotated through like a spontaneous rescue team, each bringing advice steeped in their own essence and, without intending to, adding weight to shoulders already tired. Naomi's anger didn't point outward, it turned inward, shredded her letters of self-reassurance into tiny pieces, tossed them into the air and watched them spiral up to the ceiling before falling back down, leaving the living room floor carpeted with meaningless white paper. At the bottom of herself, she knew no one could tidy this storm for her, and at the moment she opened the window to let the cold wind rush in, she forced the hardest admission. To ask the right person for help in the right way at the right time, and accept the price of losing the perfect endurance image she had worn like a tin-plated medal. As the day slid toward evening, each character shoved themselves one notch closer to the wall. Vernon stepped from the secret meeting with a decision sealed, aware that every retreat would now hold his fingerprints. He told himself his actions were sacrifice in defense of the whole, but the dark part of him smiled faintly at the power of holding the game's switch. Anita stood in the studio and cut the final thread binding her to the illusion that patience would be rewarded. She converted energy from expectation into control, poured herself into a personal project, and drew boundaries that required anyone approaching to answer questions about their own honesty. Derek returned with Shanice's mirror haunting the back of his neck like a ghost, each decision to dodge responsibility now reflected as a new line across his forehead, and he faced an unlovely choice: either deliver his own verdict and begin untying each mistake, or keep signing short-term contracts with good luck and hope allies wouldn't vote him down at the last minute. Leslie twisted her life down the path least friendly to dreamers. She drafted questions, mapped intersections of relationships, prepared to withstand the severe looks of those who believed in Ted, and was ready to be labeled a traitor simply for refusing to shut her eyes for the sake of peace. Naomi, after letting the cold air wash the walls, lifted her phone and sent a single message to the person who could pull her back from the edge, not with advice but with presence, a rare courage seldom praised because it is quiet, yet capable of bending a trajectory. The most frightening conflict isn't what people do to each other but what they dare to do to the image of themselves. Vernon must choose between maintaining the part of protector or removing the mask and accepting a face that cannot explain itself. Anita must toe the thin line between pride and ruthlessness, because every boundary she builds risks slicing back into a heart not yet healed. Derek faces the hardest test for someone accustomed to forgiveness, learning to live without an applauding audience, accepting an empty stage long enough to change the habit of self-deceit. Leslie stakes her honor on her ability to catch the scent of truth even when it's drenched in luxury fragrance, ready to pay with relationships that once served as her safety net. Naomi chooses the bravery most fear, naming her own frailty and inviting it to sit at the table, so she can negotiate with the dark rather than run from it each night. And then, as night laid its shadow on the gravel drives, Fairmont Crest turned into a circuit board glowing with smoldering decisions. Hidden lines connected every house, transmitting current from anger, disappointment, pride, remorse, and ambition. An envelope not yet fully burned, a mix finally tuned to the right frequency, a mirror still covering a tabletop, a list of questions beneath a lamp, a message already sent. Each was tinder awaiting the moment of contact. No one had to shout, they could still form a perfect blast. When the smoke clears, the only salvation will be a naked truth no longer beautified by tools, or a loss big enough to force the survivors to learn how to breathe in new air. But before that happens, each person must count their pulse in the dark and ask the most dangerous question they have long avoided: what enrages them more, the betrayal of others, or their own weakness in having seen the signs too early and choosing to keep walking as if nothing were there? The night closed like a door slowly turning on a softly creaking hinge, leaving a thin blade of light where freshly sealed choices still gave off heat. Vernon returned with a carefully carved calm, but his silence was as heavy as a second contract beyond any signature, ready to drop at the slightest wrong touch. Anita stood alone in the studio, turning off every sound to hear the beat of caution, then saved an untitled draft as a promise to herself that tomorrow morning would tolerate no gray zones. Derek sat before the dark window, counting his reflections in the glass, each silhouette a different ending, and all of them demanded immediate payment instead of the comfort of next time. Leslie stacked her list of questions, marked the links most likely to snap with a single new detail, and prepared to accept solitude to keep the path of truth straight. Naomi locked her phone, pressed her forehead to the cool frame, and took a long breath as if learning to breathe again, as if teaching her body to believe there's still room for a beginning tomorrow. Beneath every house, Fairmont Crest hummed with faint tremors, a message sent a beat too late, a data file just unlocked, a tracking device someone had switched to another channel, and a strange call appearing as a blurred sequence of numbers. An envelope not fully burned at the bottom of a bin will be found. An invoice accidentally stamped with the same date will betray the meeting point. A rusted audio clip on an old hard drive may tilt the balance. And a name erased from a calendar will resurface in a hospital record at an odd hour. As dawn nudged the horizon, the still lake began to fracture with concentric ripples no one could trace to their source. Who will touch the first fissure and bring the surface down? Who will vanish before the question is answered? Who will trade reputation for a scrap of truth just large enough to stop a cascade? Keep watching as the next steps break the surface, whether Vernon's meeting was truly just business, whether the information Eva sent pulls Leslie out of neutrality, whether Derek's resolve cuts deep enough to reverse course, and whether Anita's untitled draft becomes the opening blow for a new order in which everything must return to face value. Because here, every promise is credit with interest, and tomorrow has already started charging from tonight.